Euphemia Mondic, the bigamist serial killer. As little is known about her background, Euphemia Mondic was born in 1884 in Austrian Galicia, a crown land within the Austrian Empire formed from territories annexed from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1772. She married in with a man named George Woodward. Their union, however, was tragically short-lived, as George passed away just 3 years later in an enigmatic manner that raised numerous questions. The circumstances surrounding his untimely death were shrouded in mystery, leaving his family bewildered. Sometime during the 1910s, she emigrated to Toronto, Canada, where she married a man named George Worobchuk. Their marriage lasted for some time until she deserted him in 1914 and moved to the United States, settling in Detroit. While living there, she married Joseph Sokolsky on June 14, 1921. The couple lived in a small house on Osborne Street, where a third man, a 39-year-old fellow emigrant named John Udurovich, also resided. Shortly after they met, John developed feelings for Euphemia, but their budding relationship was complicated by Sokolsky's presence. On July 7th, the three of them went for a drive along a dirt road just outside the town. During the journey, Udurovich suddenly stopped the car, claiming that a tire had gone flat. When Sokolsky stepped out to assist him, John struck him on the head with a wrench, killing him instantly. Following this shocking act, both John and Euphemia transported the body to a nearby brick manufacturing site, where they disposed of it in a hole used for unloading materials, covering it with debris. On July 12th, authorities questioned Euphemia regarding her husband's disappearance, but without sufficient evidence for an arrest, she was released. Subsequently, she filed for divorce, citing cruelty and desertion as grounds for the separation. The court granted her the divorce, awarding her ownership of their house on Osborne. Sometime after the murder, John proposed to Euphemia, but she denied his advancements on the grounds that the neighbors would get suspicious because of her husband's recent disappearance. Euphemia then moved to a house on Dwyer Street, but only 3 weeks later, Udurovich found her again and threatened her at gunpoint to marry him. Euphemia initially pretended to accept his offer, but when he sat down to read the newspaper, she grabbed his revolver and shot him in the abdomen. Frightened, John attempted to flee through the window, but was shot in the back and fell, whereupon Euphemia got closer and shot him in the neck, killing him. On the following morning, she buried the body under the house and moved away yet again. Euphemia eventually remarried, this time to a man named Steve Mondic. The couple lived together with seemingly no issues for around 3 years, until Euphemia suddenly deserted him in September 1924, taking $5,700 with her for a supposed move back to her native Poland. Distressed by this, Steve went to the police station and begged the officer in charge to find his wife, mentioning that she had taken some clothing and all the money. In an attempt to bring further attention to his pleas, he mentioned that she had previously been questioned in the disappearance of a previous husband, whereupon Steve was brought to the Homicide Division's room to give further details. Looking further into her case, detectives not only discovered that she had won a successful divorce lawsuit against her missing husband, but that another man who had been in her company had also gone missing. 4 days later, they received an anonymous tip that Euphemia was attempting to sell her property at the county building, where she was arrested and jailed on a murder charge. After refusing to admit her guilt for more than 4 hours, she finally confessed to shooting a man and burying his body under the house on Dwyer Street, agreeing to show detectives exactly where she had buried him. After excavating the house and uncovering a complete human skeleton, initially believed to be Sokolsky, the investigators were shocked to learn that this was her lover, John Udurovich. Euphemia was then brought back to the police station for further questioning, where they learned that she had been in a total of 9 relationships across Poland, Canada, and the United States, but authorities were unable to locate all of her husbands and suitors. Ultimately, Euphemia faced charges only for the murder of John, as authorities were unable to find Sokolski's remains. While awaiting her trial, she held out hope for an acquittal on the murder charge, but this did not materialize, and she was ordered to proceed to trial. During the proceedings, she pleaded self-defense, claiming she had been terrified of Udurovich and felt compelled to kill him. In response, the prosecution presented parts of Udorovich's skeleton to demonstrate where he had been shot, suggesting that the act was premeditated. Upon seeing the evidence, Euphemia broke down in tears. In the end, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, her 2 surviving husbands met to congratulate each other on their survival before saying their goodbyes to her. Euphemia was then transferred to the Detroit House of Correction in Plymouth Charter Township, where she remained until her death from a heart attack on August 20th, 1961, at the age of 77. According to Superintendent Jonathan Goldsmith, she had no visitors in the last decade of her life and spent much of her time caring for the prison flower garden and feeding stray animals. During her imprisonment, she reportedly became more religious and occasionally received letters from the Salvation Army. The Black Widow serial killer, Mary Cowan. Although she is not widely recognized, Mary Cowan was one of the most ruthless and lethal female serial killers of the 19th century. Her readiness to kill her husbands and children without any apparent remorse makes her a compelling subject for study. Mary Knight was born in Plymouth, Maine, in 1863. Her father, Jonathan Knight, was a Civil War veteran. The Knight family lived in a rural, quiet area of Maine. Mary grew up in the family home, where she remained until she married Willis Bean, a farmer who lived in the neighboring town of Dixmont. Mary and Willis had 3 daughters during their marriage, named Grace, Alice, and Mabel. Although Willis worked as a farmer, he harbored greater aspirations. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, and his wife supported him in this ambition. Unfortunately, he couldn't pursue this goal right away, as he needed to earn a living to support his family. With their financial situation, they were unable to afford medical school, so Willis's dream was temporarily set aside. In 1884, tragedy struck when Grace, just 3 years old, was found dead in their home. A neighbor who discovered her rushed to inform Mary, who appeared unfazed by the loss. She simply replied that she was already aware of Grace's death, stating that it had occurred about half an hour earlier. Due to the mysterious nature of Grace's death, it was seemingly chalked up to a freak occurrence. The very same year, the couple's middle child, Alice, fell ill with a mysterious stomachache. She died shortly after her symptoms first appeared. The family had lost 2 of their 3 children, with only their youngest, Mabel, remaining. Tragically, Mabel passed away the following year, in 1885, after battling the same strange stomachache that had killed her sister. There is no historical record of these tragic deaths ever being investigated as suspicious. During this time, Willis Bean was attending a school and trying to earn a medical diploma, but unfortunately, the institution he was attending turned out to be a scam. A new law shut down the fraudulent institution for selling fake diplomas, and Willis never received his. After this setback, Willis convinced his parents to purchase a farm for him and Mary to live on, and the couple agreed to pay his parents back for their expenses. Shortly after, Willis decided to again pursue his medical degree, and the couple moved to Ohio for Willis to enroll in a medical program. In early 1888, Willis's parents received a letter informing them that he had died. According to reports, shortly before his death, Willis had suffered unexplained stomach pains. Mary returned home, temporarily living with her in-laws. The widow claimed she was unaware of any agreement to repay Bean's parents for the farm. With nothing more than a verbal agreement binding them, Mary was awarded full ownership of the farm. She sold the farm for $2,000, leaving the Bean family behind without their farm and mourning the deaths of their son and 3 grandchildren. Shortly after Willis Bean's death, Mary married George Taylor, who worked at the nearby Lewiston Mills. She moved in with her new husband, but in 1891, George experienced 4 days of severe stomach pain, which ultimately led to his death. As a member of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, George had a life insurance policy. Unfortunately for Mary, he had fallen behind on his dues, so the insurance benefits were not available. In a show of compassion, fellow members collected several $100s to help support the newly widowed Mary. Despite her outward grief, Mary moved on quickly. A few months later, she married Elias Cowan. His former wife had passed away, leaving Elias to care for their now 8-year-old son, Willis. Elias was a farmer with an impressive homestead. Shortly after their marriage, several of his buildings were burned down under mysterious circumstances. Aside from this, Mary was rumored to be less than kind to her new stepson, who allegedly suffered beatings for the slightest misstep. In September 1894, Willis grew ill after snacking on some apples. He was suffering from extreme stomach pain, and his father summoned the local doctor to assess his condition. The doctor prescribed medication to help alleviate the symptoms and was confident that Willis would make a full recovery. Yet, after 2 more days of intense suffering and immense pain, Willis died. Strangely, Elias had also recently suffered from debilitating stomach pain, but he made a recovery. Given the prevailing history of unexplained stomach issues resulting in death that pervaded Mary's past, Willis's body was exhumed from its final resting place, and Bowdoin College performed a toxicological analysis of his internal organs. Upon receiving the results of this analysis, the scientists determined that Willis had an alarming amount of arsenic in his body. Allegedly, the child had a high enough concentration of arsenic to kill an adult ox. Immediately after the test results came back, police arrested Mary for the murder of Willis Cowan. Mary Cowan's trial began in February of 1895. Maine had never dealt with a serial killer, and as such, the newspapers printed Mary's story far and wide. She was given the title of the Borgia of Maine, a reference to Lucrezia Borgia, a famous Italian noblewoman known for poisoning men who had outlived their usefulness to her. Mary never confessed to poisoning Willis, but the evidence against her, along with her previous history, was compelling. In early March, the jurors reached their final decision. Mary Cowan was found guilty of murdering her stepson. She was sentenced to life in prison at Maine State Prison. At the time of her conviction, Mary was pregnant, and shortly after her incarceration, she gave birth to a daughter. Unfortunately, the infant did not survive. By 1898, Mary's health was deteriorating. Her doctor appealed to the governor of Maine for a pardon, hoping she could spend her final days at home in Dixmont. However, in September 1898, Mary passed away in prison. She was buried in Sawyer Cemetery in her hometown of Plymouth, laid to rest in the same plot as her deceased husbands and children, innocent victims of her violent actions. While many may not be familiar with Mary Cowan, she is notorious for being Maine's first and most lethal serial killer. The fact that she poisoned and killed her own children highlights her disturbing depravity, distinguishing her from other killers often labeled as Black Widows. Sarah Jane Whitling, the wholesale poisoner. Sarah, who said she was born in Germany, first married Tom Brown in Clinton, Iowa in 1868. They later moved to Chicago and then to Philadelphia after the Great Fire. Tom was sent to prison for robbery and died there. Afterward, Sarah had a daughter named Bertha with a man named Thomas Story, who owned an oyster bar. In March 1880, she married John Whitling and brought her 9-month-old daughter with her. In 1886, they had a son named William C. Whitling, whom they called Willie. On March 30th, 1888, John died suddenly, with the attending physician Dr. G. W. Smith evaluating that the cause of death was inflammation of the bowels. His life had been insured in 2 companies, the John Hancock Financial and the Benevolent Order of Buffaloes, each paying Sarah $145 and $85 respectively. When questioned about his death, she claimed that he had committed suicide. On April the 24th, Bertha also died, with her verdict being typhoid fever. She, too, had been insured by the John Hancock Financial for $122. And a month after, on May 26th, Willie also died. Since Dr. Smith abandoned the case, his colleague Dr. Dietrich determined the cause of death as congestion of the bowels. Like his sister and father, he too had been insured, for $30 at the John Hancock Financial and for $17 at Prudential Financial. Sarah refused when asked if the bodies could be examined by the coroner, claiming that when one of her previous children supposedly died in an almshouse, doctors had started the post-mortem exam process and realized, much too late, that the child was still alive. The short time between the deaths raised suspicions for Coroner Ashbridge. After talking with the health office, he ordered an investigation. With the help of Chief Detective Wood and Detective Geyer, the bodies were dug up from Mechanic Cemetery. Professor Leffman examined them and found large amounts of arsenic. Sarah Jane Whitling was arrested soon after and placed on suicide watch. During her time in jail, she spent a lot of time praying and eventually confessed to killing her 2 children with a poison called rough-on rats. When asked why she did it, Mrs. Whitling said she killed Bertha to stop her from becoming a sinful and wicked girl because she had misbehaved and stolen from her teacher and neighbors. She said Willie was poisoned because he was in the way. Regarding John's death, Sarah denied that she poisoned him, claiming that he took the poison himself because they were very poor. She had planned to take her own life after the murders, but changed her mind because the Bible says that people who do that can't enter heaven. At her trial, Whiteling's lawyer tried his best to convince the jury that his client was insane and had to be sentenced to life imprisonment. After deliberating on the issue, they returned and pronounced her guilty of first-degree murder and received a mandatory death sentence. While the verdict didn't faze Sarah at all, it shocked the contemporary public in Philadelphia, especially the female population, who went so far as to sign a petition for commutation of her sentence. Despite this, Governor Beaver did not change her sentence. Whitling was only prosecuted for her daughter's murder, as there was insufficient evidence for the other murders. While imprisoned, Sarah was informed that she had been left a fortune from a deceased relative back in Iowa. On the execution date, Sarah Whitling appeared to be unmoved by her conundrum, as she believed that God will forgive her sins and that she will go to heaven to be with her children. On June 25, 1889, at 10 o'clock, following a short prayer delivered by Reverend William D. Jones, the trap was sprung. Whitling suffocated from the strangulation, although, according to physicians, her heart had continued beating for a little while after the drop. Her body was then sent for dissection to Dr. Alice W. Bennett, who examined her brain before eventually being sent off to be buried alongside her murdered relatives.